Debate. The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, there are few values more important to the people I represent, like my colleague who just spoke, than those of advancing freedom and protecting individual rights and liberties, especially when it comes to the creeping, reaching, interfering, and heavy hand of government and its agencies. So I oppose Bill C-11 because it's not just about what its proponents claim. It will be a way for the Liberal cabinet and CRTC gatekeepers to control what Canadians see, say, and hear online. But the Liberals have ignored and ridiculed the concerns about C-11's impacts and potential unintended consequences for Canadian media of all kinds and for everyday Canadians. Thousands of Canadians and Conservatives have spoken out for 3 years. So now, at the very final stage before it becomes law, the charitable assumption that its proponents are unclear or unintentional about the risks and potential consequences can no longer be entertained. Bill C-11 remains an attempt by the Liberals to regulate the internet with unprecedented powers for the CRTC with no clear guidelines or guardrails on those censorship powers. The other parties argue for the bill on two main grounds: modernization of the Broadcasting Act and that it will enhance and expand Canadian content and culture online. But the truth is that Bill C-11 goes backwards on Canadians' successful online innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurialism by regulating it with the Broadcasting Act. And instead of promoting Canadian content as a whole, C-11 will instead pick winners and losers, prioritize and deprioritize content, and therefore shape what Canadians see regardless of their actual preferences, and whether Canadians can be seen or heard under its criteria, which will be decided by CRTC and ministers. To be clear on this point, I really don't care what party it is. This power in particular shouldn't be extended to any. And while, unlike the Liberals, Conservatives measure success by outcomes delivered, not money spent, the challenge how to best expand and promote Canadian content is clearly not going to be done as well by C-11 as it is already being done by the private sector. Hardly a surprise. For example, the Motion Picture Association of Canada is responsible for half of domestic media production and spent $5 billion in 2021 alone. That private sector investment is 5 times the amount allotted in Bill C-11. It's more of the costly coalition's usual MO of spending lots of tax dollars regardless of results and despite the private sector's obvious leadership. It's a government gatekeeping and taxpayer-funded solution in search of a problem. The core problem with the way Bill C-11 deals with the concept of Canadian content is, one, it doesn't actually define it and enables politicians to tell the CRTC what it is, and two, any person or business may be restricted since their content can be pushed up or down if it's decided that they fit or if they're not Canadian enough. But Canadians don't have to decipher the truth from our back and forth here. Currently, the CRTC's definition of Canadian content often depends on copyright ownership, which big streaming services usually keep instead of, say, Canadian staff, locations, writers, actors, compositions, art, or stories. The power granted to politicians is clear in C-11 Section 7. Quote, the Governor and Council may, by order, issue to the Commission directions of general application on broad policy matters. Well, Governor and Council means a cabinet minister. Conservatives tried to remove that clause to ensure the CRTC chair would be free from political interference, but Liberals blocked it, so the power's there. So after the costly coalition pushes through Bill C-11, Liberals will write a set of backdoor regulations for the CRTC and then apply some sort of values test to every YouTube video, Facebook post, TV show, documentary, radio show, and it's endless. Social media is caught because of Bill C-11's definition of online undertakings, and programs which can include images and sounds where written text is limited. That could mean videos, podcasts, photos, and memes, but not written posts or news articles. Sections 9 and 10 could empower the CRTC to adopt these so-called discoverability rules that would force social media sites like YouTube to modify algorithms and affect how often videos are seen on social media feeds based on the yet-to-be-determined criteria for what is and isn't sufficiently Canadian. So C-11 clearly makes the Canadian government and agency the regulator of the internet. The regulations will, of course, prescribe, quote, what constitutes a Canadian program. If the content isn't Canadian enough, it'll get slapped with fees, taxes, and it'll be censored. If it is Canadian enough, it'll continue just like content does now. C-11 will also force content creators from small YouTubers all the way to Netflix to pay fees to the Canadian Media Fund, but doesn't define who will be exempted and makes creators pay based on a point system that value tests if their content production is Canadian enough. The winners will be, of course, government-subsidized broadcasters, such as the already advantaged government-funded CBC, which would get even more funding with Bill C-11. The losers are the independent innovators driving Canadian digital leadership and often young Canadians.
Shame.
You know, so much for the democratized free market of ideas that the internet embodies. Conservatives propose to define discoverability and limit government algorithm manipulation, as well as amendments to ensure greater transparency of the CRTC and its decision-making, but Liberals rejected them. Digital entrepreneurs have grown rapidly on YouTube and Instagram. They create brands off their channels and the advertising revenues their videos generate. They're worried that they won't qualify as Canadian enough and that small channels with only a couple hundred subscribers and next to no revenue will suddenly be forced to pay government or even get fined up to $25,000 per day, as in Section 32. It's crazy that a young Canadian YouTuber could get fined because they're not Canadian enough. Conservatives also tried to remove Section 4, which may be referenced by members opposite as exempting normal Canadians from these CRTC rules, but the Liberals put in an exemption to the exemption right after, so there's actually no change. The Liberals plan to reject the amendment that would have explicitly encouraged the CRTC to regulate professional copywritten content, which seems to be their actual aim, instead of individual user-created content. Even then, it doesn't change the discoverability rules that will control and prioritize what Canadians see and hear, thereby controlling the content creators. Experts warn this will happen. Former CRTC Commissioner Peter Menzies says under C-11, Canada will, quote, become a global leader in restricting online speech and meddling with news media. Canada's top legal scholar and digital content expert, Michael Geist, who the Liberals now deride when we quote him, says it will restrict who can hear Canadian voices. Quote, the risk with these rules is not that the government will restrict the ability for Canadians to speak, but rather that the bill could impact their ability to be heard. And if you don't have freedom to hear it, then the creator doesn't have free expression. 40,000 creators from Digital First Canada signed letters calling for these rules to be removed. Liberals ignored them. Prominent and diverse Canadian YouTubers like JJ McCullough, Megan Fortier, Justin Tomczyk, and Orby Roy have all spoken about their concerns about what C-11 will do to their viewership and to their income. JJ McCullough said, quote, given YouTubers make videos of every genre imaginable, from fitness to architecture to political commentary, it's frankly terrifying to imagine the government may soon have a hand in determining which genres of video are more worthy of promotion than other ones. And he says anyone proud of the tremendous success of Canadians on YouTube should be deeply concerned about the damage Bill C-11 could do to their livelihoods. If MPs pass this bill into law, no one can say they weren't warned about the potential consequences. The level of uncertainty, concern, as much about what isn't defined as is defined, and the potential impact on the core value of free expression should be enough for the costly coalition to hit pause and fix this bill. That's the duty of policymakers, the duty of MPs, to ensure legislation does what they claim and to mitigate unintended consequences before passing laws. MPs must defend the values of Canadians' right to freely, without censorship or risk of consequences, express their views so long as they are not inciting harm or hate, whether or not they align with the views of anyone in here. That's our job. No government agency responsible for broadcasting in our free and democratic society should have these powers to censor, control, and regulate as proposed in Bill C-11. Canadians have fought and died to defend rights to free thought and expression. I'll close with these words. You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye. Margaret Atwood was talking about love and pain, but that's what C-11 will do to what Canadians can see and hear online. She says C-11 is, quote, creeping totalitarianism. And I wouldn't presume, but it's probably fair to say that she's not a conservative, but she is a world-renowned Canadian artist and icon, and Bill C-11 supporters should actually listen to her before it's too late.
You're here.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Peterborough South.
Thank you. Northumberland,
Peterborough South. Thank you. It's getting late.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And unlike the member I heard earlier, I am burdened with the illegal education from the best law school in Canada, Osgoode Hall Law School. But I very much enjoyed this member's speech. My question is a little bit what she was talking about when she said the freedom to speak, but not necessarily the freedom to be heard. My understanding is that this will give the CRTC the ability to control algorithms, thus potentially burying comments. Perhaps like burying a comment that was called out on Twitter for not being truthful, like the member of the Kingston and the Islands. So would she be worried that member like the Kingston and Islands content might be buried?
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Well, let me just say that what I am extremely concerned about in this legislation is the ability for government and for a related agency to define what counts as Canadian content, to set all those rules, regulations, and guidelines after the law is already passed, and then apply a values test to basically what Canadians can view on the internet, thereby controlling what content is prioritized and what content is not prioritized, which by nature obviously controls the content creators.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
You know, I was sitting here quiet, Mr. Speaker. Wasn't saying a word. Wasn't getting in the middle of it. Then the member from Peterborough, Northumberland, Peterborough, decided to get up. So I do have a question. I shared a video recently, Mr. Speaker, of the former leader of the Conservative Party slow-clapping Joe Biden, extremely disrespectful. Now, that's already seen just under 2 million views on Twitter. I'm wondering if the member can comment as to whether or not I should be concerned about my content getting views like that. 2 million views of the member from Regina Capel. Should I be concerned, Mr. Speaker, if this law is passed that I won't get that kind of reach?
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Well, I don't know if the member wants to next bring forward to the House of Commons legislation that sets guidelines and regulations after the law is passed about the speed at which one ought to clap, or how and in what way Canadians adequately either show their appreciation or admiration or concern. I'm not sure. I appreciate the member for standing up here and asking the question, but you know, I would think for the tens of thousands of Canadians who worried about their free expression, their income, their individually driven businesses, their online entrepreneurialism and innovation, given that this subject really gets to the foundations of our democracy, probably Canadians would want to see him as a member of the governing party and the costly coalition that will be the ultimate determination on this bill take this issue seriously.
Question et commentaire.
The honourable member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, we always hear the same thing from the Conservatives. They have a fear-mongering campaign. They say that freedom of speech will be attacked, but there's nothing in the bill on that. But what the bill does, and what the Conservatives never talk about, is that it brings equity to Quebec and Canadian cultural production. For 30 years, cable distributors have been contributing, and digital broadcasters weren't included at the time because they didn't exist. Why do the Conservatives not want YouTube and Netflix and Disney Plus to pay their fair share for the production of cultural content and help our creators and artists?
The honourable member for Lakeland.
I guess if the government or the member who props up the government and supports everything they do, except sometimes not, but keeps them in power so Canadians can't actually have a say on this disaster. I guess if he wanted to have a piece of legislation that focused directly and solely and only on that topic, they could have put it forward and we could have been debating that. But that's not the only consequences of C-11, and so we're not.